Have you ever, like, looked at a country's government and thought, oh, yeah, president, parliament, the usual.
Yeah.
But then when you actually start digging deeper, you realize it's way more complicated.
Absolutely.
Like Sri Lanka, it's so fascinating how they've set up their system of shared power.
Yeah.
We've got some great stuff to work with today. We've got my notes that I took when I was really digging into this back in February.
Mhm.
And then we've got this super helpful document called Sri Lankan Constitutional Framework,
Yeah.
Key Themes and Principles.
Sounds good.
And of course, we've got to go right to the source with excerpts from constitution.pdf.
Nice.
So our mission today is to break down how power is actually split up in the Sri Lankan government
Okay.
and make it clear who does what and how they keep it all in check.
Sounds like a plan.
So one of the first things that really surprised me was this connection between the president and parliament.
Yeah, it's not like they're totally separate branches.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting overlap.
You'd think the president's mainly focused on the executive branch stuff.
Right.
But in Sri Lanka, they have this very specific role in parliament right from the get-go.
Oh, how so?
So I'm looking back at my notes here.
Okay.
And Article 38 says that the president actually delivers the statement of government policy in parliament
Wow.
at the start of every session.
So like they're setting the tone for the whole year?
Yeah, like the opening keynote laying out the priorities.
That's a pretty big deal.
Right. And it's not just about setting the agenda either.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah, same article mentions they also get to preside over ceremonial sittings of parliament.
Interesting.
So that kind of emphasizes the symbolic link between the executive and legislative branches.
I see what you mean.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Article 36 actually requires the president to attend parliament once every 3 months.
Every 3 months?
Yeah, isn't that wild?
That's pretty hands-on.
And get this, when they're there, they get all the same privileges and powers as an MP, except they can't vote.
So they're right there in the thick of it.
Imagine that the head of the executive branch just showing up in the legislature regularly.
It's like they're keeping their finger on the pulse.
Right.
It's not something you see everywhere.
I guess that's a way to encourage more direct accountability and communication.
Yeah, it definitely blurs the lines a bit between the branches.
Right.
But it seems like it's designed to make sure they're talking to each other.
For sure.
Oh, and Article 37 adds that the president can also address Parliament or send messages anytime.
So they've got multiple ways to make their voice heard.
Exactly. They can always get their perspective across.
Okay, so now let's shift gears and talk about Parliament itself.
All right.
Article 1 makes it crystal clear. Their main job is to use the legislative power of the people.
Okay. The power to make laws.
Exactly. And it's all done through our elected representatives.
That's the foundation right there.
Yep. And their power isn't limited to just making new laws either.
What else can they do?
Article 18 says they can also make laws that apply retroactively.
Interesting.
And this is a big one. They can even amend the Constitution.
Wow. So they can change the most important legal document in the country.
Yeah, but obviously there are some safeguards in place.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Articles 18 through 20 lay out all the specific rules.
Okay.
Usually they need a supermajority to make those changes.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they even need to hold a national referendum.
So it's not something they can do lightly?
Exactly.
Ah.
It ensures there's a really broad agreement when it comes to messing with the Constitution.
Makes sense.
And their influence goes beyond just shaping laws.
Oh, really?
They also hold the purse strings, so to speak.
Okay.
Article 21 says no taxes or fees can be imposed unless Parliament passes a law for it.
So the executive branch can't just do whatever they want with money.
Nope. Parliament has to approve it.
That's a pretty important check on their power.
Yeah, it's all about accountability. And speaking of accountability, Parliament also plays a key role in setting up some pretty important oversight bodies.
Oh, like what?
So Articles 22, 23, and 24 talk about how they establish the Parliamentary Commissioner for Administration,
Okay.
who's basically like an ombudsman.
I see.
Then there's the Commission to investigate allegations of bribery or corruption, and the National Procurement Commission.
So they're really focused on keeping things clean and transparent.
Exactly.
That's good.
And lastly, within Parliament itself, Article 12 says they have certain privileges and immunities,
Okay.
which are all laid out in law.
So they can do their jobs without any undue pressure.
Right. It protects them from interference.
Makes sense.
So we've talked about the president and Parliament and how they interact.
Yeah, their relationship is pretty unique.
But the executive branch is bigger than just the president.
Right. There's a whole team.
What else should our listeners know about how that executive power is structured?
Well, one thing that stands out is the Cabinet of Ministers.
Okay.
Article 43 lung out their role.
Right. And it says they're responsible for directing and controlling the entire government.
Wow, so they're like the central command?
Pretty much.
But it's not like they have free reign.
Right.
That same article emphasizes that they're collectively responsible to Parliament.
So they have to answer for their decisions.
Exactly. And the president is actually part of the cabinet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Article 43 says they're a member and the head of the cabinet.
Interesting. So they're still very involved.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Then you've got the deputy ministers, too.
Right. Article 46 talks about them.
Okay.
They're appointed by the president, but they have to consult with the prime minister first. And their job is to assist the cabinet ministers.
So it's a collaborative effort.
Definitely.
And then there's the secretaries to the ministries.
Yes, Article 52 covers that.
Okay.
They're appointed by the president, and they oversee all the government departments.
So they're like the top administrators.
Right. They make sure everything runs smoothly.
And lastly, we have the Public Service Commission.
Okay.
Article 54 describes how it's set up.
All right.
It's a 9-member body appointed by the president.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. They're appointed based on recommendations from the Constitutional Council.
Oh, so there's an extra layer of checks and balances there.
Yeah, it helps ensure those appointments are impartial,
I see.
and their powers are pretty broad.
Like what?
Article 55 says they handle appointments, promotions, transfers, disciplinary actions, and even dismissals within the public service.
Wow, so they have a lot of control over the civil service.
Yeah, they're key to maintaining a fair and efficient system.
That's really important.
So we've covered the presidency, parliament, and the whole executive branch.
It's a lot to take in.
Now let's dive into the third branch of government, the judiciary.
All right, let's talk about the courts.
Article 4 sets the stage by saying that the judicial power of the people is exercised by Parliament through courts, tribunals, and institutions.
Okay, so Parliament establishes the framework.
Right. And Article 105 reinforces that. It says it's Parliament's job to establish courts and other judicial bodies. And it clarifies that all the existing courts are considered to have been established by Parliament as well.
So the legislature lays the groundwork.
Exactly. But even though Parliament sets things up, the judiciary operates pretty independently when it comes to making decisions.
That's good to know.
And there's a clear hierarchy of courts,
Okay.
each with its own area of expertise.
Starting with the Supreme Court at the top.
Exactly. Article 125 says they have sole and exclusive jurisdiction over any questions about interpreting the Constitution.
Wow, so they're the ultimate authority on what it means.
Yep. Think of it like this. The Constitution is the rule book for the country. And the Supreme Court is the referee deciding what the rules actually mean when there's a disagreement.
That's a good analogy.
And their role goes beyond just interpreting the Constitution.
What else do they handle?
Article 126 gives them the power to decide on any cases involving the infringement or potential infringement of fundamental rights by the government.
So they protect individual liberties from the state.
Exactly. They're a crucial safeguard.
That's really important.
Then we have the Court of Appeal.
Okay.
Article 139 says their jurisdiction is decided by Parliament.
So the legislature has some say in what they can do.
But Article 141 gives them a pretty important independent power.
What's that?
They can issue writs, including habeas corpus.
Oh, wow. So they can protect people from being unlawfully detained.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a check on the executive branch's power.
I see.
Then there's the High Court.
Okay.
Article 111 says they have whatever jurisdiction and powers Parliament gives them.
So again, the legislature sets the boundaries.
Yep.
But it's not just the courts themselves that manage the judiciary, right?
Right, you've got the Judicial Service Commission, too.
Oh, yeah. Article 111H talks about that.
They're responsible for appointing, transferring, and disciplining judicial officers.
Okay.
Except for the Supreme Court and Court of Appeal judges.
So they keep the lower courts running smoothly.
And they help ensure impartiality and integrity.
That makes sense.
Okay, so we've looked at the three main branches at the national level.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex system.
But Sri Lanka also has a system of devolved power.
Right. They have provincial councils.
So let's talk about how power is distributed there.
Okay.
Chapter 7A of the Constitution directly addresses the establishment of provincial councils.
So it's built right into their system.
Yep, and both the Sri Lankan Constitutional Framework Document and the Ninth Schedule lay out how legislative powers are divided.
They use lists, right?
Exactly, 3 of them.
Okay, remind me what they are again.
So there's List I, which is the provincial council list.
Mm-hmm.
And that covers all the subjects they have the power to make laws about.
Okay.
But they still have to operate within the framework of the Constitution and other national laws.
Of course.
Then there's List 2, the reserve list,
Okay.
which includes all the areas where Parliament has exclusive legislative power.
Got it.
And finally, there's List 3, the concurrent list.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where both Parliament and provincial councils can make laws.
So there's some overlap there.
Right. Which can get a little tricky.
Yeah, I can see how that could lead to conflicts.
Definitely.
So can you give us some examples of what kinds of things are on each list?
Sure. So if you look at the 9th schedule, you'll see that the provincial council list covers things like local government, provincial public administration, and services, provincial planning, and economic development.
Okay, so things that are very specific to their region.
Exactly.
What about the reserve list?
That's where Parliament keeps control over things like national policy defense, foreign affairs, finance, civil aviation, and shipping.
So the big picture stuff.
Right.
And what about the concurrent list?
That includes things like social services, youth activities, housing and construction, and environmental protection.
So things that could have both national and regional implications.
Yeah.
So the provincial councils actually have some real legislative power.
They do, and each province also has a governor
Okay.
appointed by the president according to Article 154B, and they have a few key powers. They can summon prorogue and even dissolve the provincial council.
Wow, so they have a lot of control.
They do, but there are some limits.
Oh, good.
Article 154G says that if they want to dissolve the council, they usually need to act on the advice of the chief minister.
As long as the Board of Ministers still has the support of the majority.
Right.
So it's not a decision they can make unilaterally.
No.
Each province also has a Board of Ministers headed by a chief minister.
Yep. Article 154E talks about that.
Okay.
The chief minister is appointed by the governor, and the whole board is collectively responsible to the provincial council.
Just like the cabinet of ministers is responsible to Parliament.
Exactly. It ensures accountability at the provincial level.
Makes sense.
So we've seen how power is shared between the national branches and then further devolved to the provinces.
Yeah, it's a pretty intricate system.
But what are the guiding principles behind it all?
Well, Article 3 starts by establishing the sovereignty of the people.
Right. That's the foundation.
And then Article 4 says that this sovereignty is exercised through the 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial.
So that very division of powers acts as a check on each branch.
Exactly. No one branch can become too powerful.
And as we mentioned before, there are those specific limitations on Parliament's power to amend the Constitution.
Right. They need supermajorities and sometimes even referendums.
Those safeguards prevent them from making radical changes without a lot of support.
It protects the core principles of the Constitution.
And we can't forget about the fundamental rights outlined in Chapter 3.
Right. Those are super important.
While Article 15 does allow for some restrictions on those rights in certain situations, the fact that they exist and that the Supreme Court can address any infringements under Article 126 acts as a major check on both the legislature and the executive branch.
So individual liberties are protected.
Exactly.
And one more thing that really stood out to me.
Okay.
Both the Key Themes document and Article 157A explicitly prohibit separatism.
Yeah. And that, along with the oath, MPs have to take as described in the 7th schedule. And Article 161 really emphasizes the commitment to a unified Sri Lanka.
It sets a clear boundary on what's acceptable.
Right.
So to sum it all up, Sri Lanka has this really sophisticated system for distributing power.
With lots of checks and balances in place.
Not just between the branches at the national level.
But also through the devolution of power to those provincial councils.
Which have their own executive and legislative structures accountable to their own bodies.
It's definitely a lot to wrap your head around.
Yeah. But this deep dive has given us a good overview of how it all works.
Hopefully it's helped our listeners understand the key mechanisms for sharing and balancing power in Sri Lanka.
So thinking about all this, how do you think this division of power between Parliament and the provincial councils might play out in practice?
Yeah, that's a great question for our listeners to ponder.
Do you think there will be more opportunities for collaboration or conflict?
It's definitely something to consider.
And we encourage everyone to explore the full constitutional text on their own.
It's a fascinating read.
And think about how these structures impact the everyday lives of people in Sri Lanka.
It's all connected.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.